The Unmaking of the Ghost, Part 1. Elara Vance moved through the vast, opulent halls of the Rossi mansion like a ripple in still water, present only in the subtle evidence of her work, invisible in the execution. At 27, she had perfected the art of being a ghost. 9 months had passed since she first stepped across the Italian marble threshold of Damian Rossi's Manhattan fortress, and in that time, she had learned the rhythm of his life without ever truly meeting his gaze. Her invisibility was not a lack of presence, but a tactical shield. Every polished surface, every silently opened door, every perfectly pressed linen shirt represented a small victory in her war against a relentless enemy, death. The monstrous $47,000 medical bill, a cruel inheritance left by her mother's death, was the anchor dragging her life under. The high-paying, yet inherently dangerous, job cleaning the lair of Manhattan's most powerful, and most private, Mafia boss was the only way she could chip away at that mountain. Every dollar saved was a brick placed between her younger sister, Chloe, a nervous but talented pastry chef also working in the manor's sprawling kitchen, and the suffocating grime of their old life in the Bronx. The mansion was a monument to old-world power, a symphony of dark wood, heavy velvet, and priceless, often unsettling, art. Elara's current assignment was the library, a 2-story cavern where the scent of aged leather and Cuban tobacco perpetually clung to the air. It was Damian Rossi's sanctuary, the place where she felt his presence most intensely even in his absence, where she cleaned the glass tops of heavy mahogany desks, careful never to touch the leather-bound journals or the heavy silver cigar cutter resting like a weapon on its tray. She wore the uniform, a standard, charcoal gray domestic dress, like a shroud. It was designed for service, but for Elara, it was a uniform of anonymity. This afternoon, however, her usual focus was fractured. The silence of the manor felt heavier than usual, and a premonition, cold and sharp, pricked the back of her neck. Chloe had been unusually quiet during their brief, furtive check-in in the staff quarters, and the anxiety about the next debt payment was a low, constant hum beneath her ribcage. By 10:30 p.m., the manor had settled into its nocturnal hush. Elara finished her last task, adjusting the throw pillows in the secondary drawing room, and felt the familiar, bone-deep fatigue. She punched out, exchanged a few silent nods with the evening security detail, and stepped out onto the cold, late autumn street. Her commute was a ritual of caution, 3 quick blocks to the subway station, keeping to the well-lit side of the avenue, eye-scanning every shadow. Tonight, the cold bit deep, and the streetlights seemed dimmer. She was just 2 blocks from the subway entrance when the silence broke. "Hey, uniform." The voice was gravelly, laced with casual menace. Elara froze, her heart instantly migrating to her throat. She didn't turn around. She just kept walking, faster, hoping they hadn't seen her clearly. I said, "Stop." 2 figures detached themselves from the shadows of a brownstone stoop. They were big, dressed in cheap, dark leather, and moving with the coiled tension of predators. Elara abandoned caution and sprinted. It was useless. A third man, who had been waiting further down the street, intercepted her. He grabbed her from behind, his arm a vice around her ribs, squeezing the air from her lungs. The 2 others closed in. "Look what we got here," the interceptor sneered, pulling her back toward the stoop. A little maid from the big house. The initial fear of being mugged, of losing the $100 she'd squirreled away in her boot, was instantly replaced by a cold terror. This wasn't a random robbery. They knew where she worked. "Just the money, okay? Take it." "Please," Elara gasped, already reaching for her boot. The man who seemed to be the leader, a bulky figure with a cruel, narrow face, shook his head slowly. He didn't look at her purse. He looked at her uniform. "We don't want your pocket change, doll," he said, his voice flat. "We want to send a message." The assault that followed was swift and brutal. It wasn't about theft, it was about performance. They didn't use weapons, relying on fists and boots, delivering focused, punishing blows. Elara curled into a ball, trying to protect her head, tasting the metallic tang of her own blood. She heard the sickening crack of bone and felt a searing pain shoot up her left arm. The leader stepped closer, forcing her chin up. Elara tried to focus through the blinding agony. She saw something glinting on his finger, a heavy, ornate ring, set with a dark stone, engraved with a sharp, angular design she didn't recognize. He pressed the ring, hard, against the soft skin of her inner forearm. "Tell Rossi Kasparov says hello." He didn't need a knife. The custom-made ring was a weapon of intimidation, an instant, crude brand. He twisted it, grinding the sharp edges into her flesh until he was satisfied the mark was deep and clear. The pain was absolute, eclipsing the broken bone in her elbow and the throbbing in her ribs. It wasn't just an injury, it was desecration, turning her body into a canvas for a geopolitical message. Then, as quickly as they appeared, they vanished, melting back into the shadows, leaving Elara shivering, bleeding, and broken on the cold pavement. She didn't cry. Crying was a luxury for the privileged. With an agonizing struggle, she pulled herself upright, leaning against the cold brick. The fear of what had just happened was immediately overshadowed by a more primal, immediate terror, being fired. Losing this job meant losing Chloe's safety, losing her chance at freedom. She had to hide it. She had to go in tomorrow. The next morning, Elara woke up to a body that felt less like her own and more like a collection of shattered glass held together by fragile skin. She swallowed 3 extra-strength pain relievers, pulled on her uniform, and tied a silk scarf tightly around her left arm, claiming a minor cooking accident to the other staff members. Her biggest challenge was Damian Rossi's private office, the final, most demanding cleaning job of the morning. She moved slowly, using only her right hand, her concentration a razor's edge trying to compartmentalize the pain. She was dusting a high shelf, her balance compromised by the broken rib in her side, when a wave of nausea, a delayed reaction to the trauma, hit her hard. Her vision swam. She stumbled, catching herself on the heavy oak credenza. The sheer momentum sent a stack of documents, thick, classified files marked with foreign script and blacked out sections, sliding off the corner. They hit the carpet with a soft, yet deafening, thud. Elara froze, a panic attack seizing her lungs. In 9 months, she had never caused a disturbance, never been noticed. Now, she was kneeling over spilled secrets, a beacon of incompetence and failure. Before she could even gather the first sheet, the office door clicked. Damian Rossi was standing there. He was a man carved from dark granite, possessing an intimidating stillness that drew all the light and sound in the room to him. He was younger than his myth suggested, his charcoal suit impeccably tailored, his eyes dark, assessing, and utterly cold, fixed not on the documents, but on her. This was the first time they had been in the same room alone, the first time his attention was entirely on her. It was terrifying. He didn't ask if she was all right. He didn't demand an explanation for the papers. He simply took 2 silent, measured steps toward her. As he approached, Elara flinched, instinctively bracing for a blow, a reaction he noticed immediately. His gaze dropped to her left arm. The cheap silk scarf, which she thought was discreet, had slipped during her fall. The mark, the fresh, angry, branded symbol of Viktor Kasparov, was fully exposed on her pale, bruised skin. Rossi stopped completely, his expression freezing. It wasn't anger she saw, or even curiosity. It was a cold, absolute recognition. He recognized the symbol, and he understood its meaning instantly. To Damian Rossi, the brutalization of a nameless domestic worker was a minor crime. But the deliberate branding of that worker with his rival's mark, inside the boundaries of his dominion, was not a crime against Elara Vance. It was an insult against Damian Rossi. It was a formal declaration of war. "Get up, Elara," his voice was low, smooth, and final. He knew her name. "You're no longer invisible." Her tactical defense had failed. By trying to hide her injury and continue her work, she had walked directly into the center of his spotlight, transforming herself from a ghost into the very message his enemy intended to send. She was not a victim, she was a flag planted in his territory. He reached down, not to help her, but to assert control, his fingers closing around her unmarked right wrist. The grip was neither cruel nor gentle, it was simply absolute. "Marco will take care of the documents," he stated, pulling her to her feet, his eyes still locked on the angry scar. "Your duties here are over. You are now mine, and I protect what is mine." Elara felt the sickening realization wash over her. Her flight from death had led her straight into a cage of gold and blood. The Mafia boss wasn't offering salvation, he was making a claim. She was a pawn in a game she hadn't known she was playing, and her fate had just been irrevocably linked to the most dangerous man in New York. Part 2. The air in Damian Rossi's office had turned brittle, charged with a danger more profound than any street assault. Elara, held by the iron vice of his grip on her wrist, stared at the branded scar on her other arm, the physical manifestation of her failed invisibility. "Marco," Damian called, his voice not raised, but carrying the unmistakable weight of ultimate authority. His security chief, a man whose silence was as unsettling as his presence, materialized instantly from the hallway. "The documents are secondary," Damian said, his eyes never leaving Elara's face. "Priorities have shifted. This woman was attacked. On my block. She was used as a billboard by Viktor Kasparov's filth." Marco's gaze flickered from Elara's bruised face to the mark, and then settled back on his boss, awaiting instruction. "Find them," Damian commanded. "Find the leader with the custom ring. I want them off the street, and I want them brought here. I want the message returned with interest. Begin the hunt immediately." Marco nodded once, the sheer efficiency of his movement confirming the ruthless speed with which this order would be executed. He was gone before Elara could process the gravity of the command. Damian's grip tightened, not painfully, but possessively. "You failed to report an incident that constitutes a declaration of war on my territory," he stated, pulling her toward the door. "That is a breach of conduct. Your employment as a maid is terminated. However, your services as an asset, my property, have just begun." He led her not toward the staff quarters, but through a series of opulent, rarely used hallways on the second floor. The mansion, she realized, was transforming around her. She was no longer a shadow traversing its public spaces, she was being ushered into its guarded core. "You won't be leaving the premises," he continued, speaking to the air as much as to her. "This is no longer about your safety, Elara. It is about control. You are an intolerable liability to my reputation while walking the streets, and an invaluable statement piece here." He opened a door into a vast suite, a private apartment within the fortress. It was furnished in cool silks and steel, utterly impersonal, yet undeniably luxurious. "You are protected here. You are confined here," Damian said, pushing her gently across the threshold. "Consider yourself a highly secured guest, or a prisoner with excellent health care. Your choice." The door shut with a solid, echoing click. Elara leaned against the cool wood, her knees weak. Her worst fear, losing the job, had been realized, but replaced by a reality far more terrifying. She was now a cage bird, tethered to the man who controlled the cage. Later that evening, after a doctor, a silent, sharp man wearing a tailored suit under his white coat, had set her elbow, splinted her ribs, and given her a cocktail of potent painkillers, she lay in the enormous silk-sheeted bed, staring at the ceiling. The luxurious captivity felt surreal. She hadn't slept in a room this quiet or clean since she was a small child. The painkillers dulled the throbbing, but they could not silence the house. Around midnight, a sound began to filter through the thick walls. It was faint at first, easily mistaken for a restless animal or the groan of old pipes. Then it became clearer. A primal sound. A scream. It was quickly cut short, replaced by a dull, percussive thud, and then a guttural cry of pain, followed by a series of sharp, professional questions sparked in Italian. Elara knew, with absolute, terrifying certainty, what she was hearing. Marco hadn't just brought the men to the mansion, he had brought them to the sublevel for interrogation. The soundproofing that muffled the sound of New York City did not fully contain the sounds of Damian Rossi's justice. She sat up, trembling, hugging her knees. This was the dark side of the protection he offered, the absolute, brutal cost. Her mind screamed for her to be horrified, to weep for the men who were now paying an unimaginable price for their transgression. But a profound, cold stillness settled over her. She listened to the whimpers, the pleas for mercy, the sounds of bone and desperation, and she didn't feel horror. She felt a savage, cold satisfaction. They had hunted her. They had treated her, not as a woman, but as a weapon to damage someone else. They had branded her body and stolen her peace. And now, the predator they sought to provoke was tearing them apart for the offense. Elara realized that the fear that had defined her entire life, the fear of death, of the Bronx, of being noticed, was being supplanted by something harder, something darker. She was witnessing the execution of her own revenge, delivered by proxy, and it tasted like cold, hard relief. She was safe, and her attackers were being destroyed. The justice was monstrous, but it was hers. The girl who had perfected being a ghost was finally allowing herself a dark, necessary validation. She fell into a deep, drug-induced sleep, the distant screams a strange, dark lullaby. The following afternoon, Elara was attempting to navigate the unfamiliar suite when Damian re-entered her life. He simply appeared, standing framed in the doorway, holding a thick folder. He didn't ask about her health. He asked about her routine. "I know you go to the library last, always," he began, walking slowly into the room. "You spend 4 minutes organizing the periodicals, always starting with the oldest edition, and you check the humidor temperature without fail, even though the footman is responsible for it. You clean the glass of the painting above the fireplace using the specialized cloth, never the general duster. You are not a maid, Elara. You are a surveillance camera." He had been watching her. Not with casual awareness, but with meticulous, obsessive scrutiny. "I watch everyone who works for me," he lied easily, though the intensity in his dark eyes refuted the casual claim. "Most of them are focused on the clock. You were focused on the numbers. The debt. The bills." He dropped the folder onto a velvet armchair. It was thick, stamped with the logo of the hospital where her mother had died. "I know about the $47,000, Elara. I know about Chloe, and the pressure you carry to keep her away from the filth of your neighborhood." The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. He didn't just know her, he knew her vulnerabilities. Her private war was now part of his ledger. "The men who touch you," he continued, his tone dangerously soft, "are no longer capable of touching anyone. That account is settled. The hospital account, that is also settled." Elara stumbled backward, clutching her bandaged arm. "What are you talking about?" "I paid it," he stated. "Every dollar. Your mother's final bill, cleared. Effective immediately." The financial shackle that had bound her for years, the reason she endured his terrifying world, was gone. It was a gesture of monumental power, devastating in its cold generosity. It was not a gift of compassion, it was a unilateral assertion of control, reinforcing the idea that she now owed him something far more profound than money. He had bought her future. Tears, which she had refused the night before, finally welled up, not of gratitude, but of sheer, disbelieving exhaustion. "You don't do things for free," she whispered, her voice cracking. A dark smile, predatory and intoxicating, touched his lips. "Nothing is ever free, Elara. But the price is rarely monetary." He closed the distance between them, trapping her against a high dresser. The scent of him, rich cologne and old leather, was overwhelming. "You are resilient. You are focused. You are exactly what I need near me," he murmured, raising his hand, not to strike, but to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing the shadow of a bruise near her temple. "You hid a broken arm and a declaration of war because you feared losing your only means of survival. That kind of focus is rare." His eyes, usually remote and cold, held a raging, possessive heat. The line between predator and protector, between captor and savior, dissolved. "I own this territory," he whispered, leaning in. "And I own the message it sends. And that means," his voice dropped to a dangerous thrum, "I own you." He kissed her then. It was not a question or a seduction, it was an imposition, a branding as absolute as the ring on her arm. His mouth was firm, demanding, laced with the taste of strong espresso and a dangerous kind of power. Elara tried to resist, but the shock, the release of the $47,000 debt, and the intoxicating, crushing protection he represented, all of it shattered her resolve. She sank against the dresser, suddenly kissing him back, drowning in the security of his formidable presence. She was no longer running, no longer hiding. She was caught, and for the first time in years, she felt perfectly, terrifyingly anchored. Part 3. The imposition of that kiss had been the final, decisive nail in the coffin of Elara's ghost persona. It was an act of raw, possessive power, yet beneath the fear, she couldn't deny the tremor of unexpected response it drew from her. For 9 months, she had been defined by absence. In that single, dominating moment, she was absolutely seen. The days following the kiss were a blurred, intense education in Damian Rossi's world. The luxurious suite became her gilded cage, and Damian himself was the keyholder, observer, and instructor. He didn't allow her to return to her previous duties, but he also didn't permit idleness. Her new role wasn't clear, only her proximity. He began treating her like a prized, fragile possession, demanding her attendance during calls and meetings he deemed harmless, or simply having her sit quietly in his library while he worked. This was when his obsession truly revealed itself. He didn't just know her habits as a cleaner, he knew her as a person. You read the business sections of the morning papers, always starting with the Japanese market, he observed one afternoon, watching her from behind his desk. You haven't touched a fiction book in 5 years. You listen to classical guitar when you think you're alone. Your favorite color isn't gray, it's emerald green, but you haven't bought anything of that color because it's not practical. Elara lowered the newspaper, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. How do you know that? I pay attention to assets I deem valuable, he replied smoothly, leaning back. People are lazy, Elara. They look at a quiet maid and they see an empty space. I look at that same maid and I see a calculating mind, a disciplined soldier, someone hoarding resources for a specific objective. That level of quiet determination is magnificent. That is why I paid your debt. It's a terrible waste to have talent like yours shackled by a petty $47,000. He wasn't offering romance, he was offering recognition. The safety and freedom he provided were inextricably linked to her perceived utility and his possessiveness. The debt was gone, replaced by a non-monetary obligation that felt heavier, more terrifyingly permanent. 2 weeks into her confinement, Damian announced the next decisive step. "I have a meeting with Viktor Kasparov tonight," he told her, standing over her while she tentatively sipped the expensive herbal tea he insisted she drink. "The rat wants to negotiate his penance. You are coming with me." Elara's carefully constructed composure shattered. "No. Please. I can't. I don't belong there." "You are the reason for the meeting," Damian stated, his voice firm. "You are the evidence, the insult, and the central piece of negotiation. You will sit next to me. You will be seen. You will confirm that any damage to you is damage to me personally." He saw her fear and, instead of soothing it, used it as motivation. "Kasparov intends to offer money, a simple cash payment to compensate for that misunderstanding involving one of my staff," Damian explained, leaning closer. "If I accept the money, you go back to being a replaceable maid. If I refuse the money and demand something else, something personal, you become an immovable object. We are choosing the latter." She was being used as a shield, a political lever, but also, irrevocably, as an object of personalized protection. The only way to ensure her long-term safety was to escalate the situation beyond a simple territorial dispute. That evening, Elara was transformed. She wore a dress provided by Damian's staff, a custom-tailored sheath of deep emerald green silk, the color he had correctly identified as her secret favorite. It was a cruel irony, she was dressed for war in the color of her hidden dreams. Her hair was styled simply, and the scars, the lingering purple bruise on her temple, the angry, red brand on her forearm, were visible, intentional accents against the elegance of the dress. The meeting was held in a private, neutral venue downtown, a high-end, silent office suite that felt more like a bunker than a negotiation room. Damian led Elara in, his hand resting on the small of her back, a public, unmistakable gesture of ownership. Viktor Kasparov was waiting. He was a man of cold, reptilian focus, surrounded by two large, heavily armed men. The air in the room was thick enough to choke on, smelling of expensive wood and potential violence. Kasparov's eyes immediately fixed on Elara, scanning the scars and the dress. The look was one of disbelief, then grudging recognition of Damian's audacity. The Albanian boss didn't waste time. He slid a portfolio across the glossy table. "Mr. Rossi. An unfortunate incident. My man went off script. I trust this compensation settles the matter of the unfortunate injury to your employee." Damian didn't even glance at the portfolio. He placed a possessive hand over Elara's, which was resting on the table, and leaned forward. "My employee?" Damian's voice was dangerously quiet, resonating with a lethal calm. "I believe there has been a profound misunderstanding, Kasparov. Elara is not an employee. She is mine. She is a personal priority. Your attempt to mark her was not an insult to my territory, it was an act of war against my house." Kasparov bristled. "This is theater, Rossi. I'm offering triple the usual compensation for such a slight. The incident is closed." "It is not closed," Damian countered. "The money you offer represents the cost of a temporary inconvenience. Elara's safety, however, represents the absolute stability of my world." He tightened his grip on her hand, drawing all attention to the woman beside him. Elara felt dizzy, realizing she wasn't just a political pawn, she was the central, non-negotiable term of surrender. "You will not compensate me with money," Damian announced, his voice ringing with finality. "You will compensate me with long-term peace. I am not interested in your territory in Queens this quarter, Kasparov. I was planning to take it next month, but I will forego the expansion. Instead, you will publicly swear an oath, here and now, to observe a permanent, personal exclusion zone around Elara Vance." Kasparov stared, stunned. Foregoing the Queen's expansion was a colossal political sacrifice, a move that cost Damian millions in future profits and considerable power. He was trading absolute expansion for one woman's security. Any damage, any slight, any shadow cast upon Elara Vance from this moment forward will be met not with retaliation, but with the immediate, total annihilation of your operations, Damian declared, his eyes burning into Kasparov's. You harmed my property. You have threatened my priority. The price is not cash, but your guaranteed, eternal respect for her safety. She is my weapon, Kasparov. Touch her, and I use her to destroy you. The silence that followed was agonizing. Kasparov finally nodded, his face pale with fury and concession. He understood the declaration. Elara was a red line drawn in blood, a boundary more sacred than territory or profit. On the drive back to the mansion, Elara was numb, leaning her head against the cool leather of the back seat. You gave up Queens, she whispered, finally finding her voice. A temporary loss of power is meaningless next to long-term stability, Damian corrected, reaching for her hand again. By making your safety cost me something monumental, I ensured that every one of my rivals now sees you as an existential threat to them. No one will touch you, Elara, because doing so costs them everything. You are permanently protected. She looked at him, truly looked at the man who had bought her freedom and, moments later, used her to surrender immense power. She had feared his world, and she still did, but she could no longer deny the visceral, unbreakable security he offered. I can't refuse this, she murmured. Good, he replied, the ghost of a triumphant smile on his lips. Because you can never leave. Part 4. The atmosphere in the mansion, after the meeting with Kasparov, had changed from strained caution to a new, intense focus. Elara was no longer a silent threat to Damian's domain, she was its publicly acknowledged cornerstone. The emotional shock of the evening, the fear, the adrenaline, the realization of what he had sacrificed for her, left her reeling, but also strangely clarified. 2 days later, Damian solidified her new position. He summoned her to the library, where the spilled documents had once signaled the end of her anonymity. Your debt to the hospital is erased. But I won't tolerate idleness, Damian stated, pushing a freshly bound document across the mahogany desk. I need a disciplined mind that anticipates chaos, not just cleans it up. You know the inner workings of this house and you have proven you can prioritize survival over emotion. You will be my personal assistant. Elara didn't move to take the document. I don't have the qualifications for that, Mr. Rossi. You have the only qualification I require, uncompromising loyalty, secured by a shared history of violence, he countered, a hint of something that might have been amusement in his eyes. This position is high visibility. You will manage my schedules, review sensitive correspondence, and serve as a proxy in situations where I require discretion but absolute clarity. Your salary will be 3 times what you were making as a maid, effective immediately. The new salary was staggering, the kind of money that could build a foundation, not just plug a leak. But it was the finality of the announcement that silenced her. She was being invited to stand beside the inferno, not just clean the ashes. And my sister, Chloe, she asked, the only thought that mattered. Chloe remains in the kitchen, supervised by the head chef. Her life is untouched and will continue to be protected, as long as you are here, he assured her. Your acceptance is not optional, Elara. But the terms are generous. She signed the contract, her hand steady despite the seismic shift in her life. The moment she did, Damian handed her a smaller, sealed envelope. Inside was the official statement from the debt collection agency, account paid in full. The bold, black letters swam before her eyes. The $47,000 burden, the relentless weight of 5 years of scrimping, hiding, and fearing the postman, was gone. The financial freedom was more profound than she could have imagined. It was not just money, it was the removal of the chains that had dictated her every breath. The safety of Chloe, the ability to breathe without the specter of ruin, it was all suddenly realized, delivered not through hard work, but through the dangerous, decisive power of Damian Rossi. She had traded one master for another, but this one had freed her from her true prison first. Her new life was a blur of high-stakes tension and meticulous organization. Her office was a small, well-appointed room adjacent to Damian's, equipped with secure lines and monitors. She rapidly proved her worth, her former attention to detail translating seamlessly into managing complex logistics. She organized his legitimate business appointments, filtered out coded requests from rival families, and learned the intricate language of coded loyalty and unspoken threats. Damian continued to be possessive, demanding her presence at all hours. Their relationship had settled into a volatile equilibrium, professional in public, yet intensely personal in private. The intimacy was less about affection and more about shared power and proximity to danger. They spoke little about the outside world, their conversations focused on strategy, weaknesses, and survival. Yet, the physical boundary remained fluid, dictated solely by Damian's impulse, a brush of his hand on her lower back, a demanding kiss in the security of his private quarters. 6 weeks passed. The bruises faded, the brand scar healed into a stark white line, a permanent, indelible reminder of the choice she had made. Elara Vance was no longer the frightened girl from the Bronx, she was sharp, resilient, and indispensable. She was Damian Rossi's shield and his confidant, standing in the crosshairs but protected by the most formidable power in the city. One cold, clear evening, Elara found Damian waiting for her in her office after she had completed a late security review. He didn't speak, only watched her with an intensity that made the hair stand up on the back of her neck. She met his gaze, no longer flinching. "Is there a problem with the Tokyo transfer, Mr. Rossi?" "The Tokyo transfer is flawless, Elara," he said, pushing off the doorframe and closing the distance between them. "The problem is that we keep pretending this arrangement is solely about business." He stopped directly in front of her. "I paid your debt. I secured your sister. I put my life and my empire on the line by refusing Kasparov's money to guarantee your untouchable status. I have made my declaration." He waited, allowing the weight of his actions to settle on her. Elara felt the familiar surge of conflicting emotions, the self-preservation instinct screaming to run, and the profound, stabilizing security she felt only in his orbit. She had feared being invisible, now she feared being exposed, but the fear of being unprotected was far worse. "I know the rules of this world now," she said quietly, her eyes locking onto his. "I know what you are, and I know the cost." "And what is your answer?" he pressed, demanding the verbal confirmation he hadn't yet received. Elara reached out, placing her hand on his chest, feeling the solid, unforgiving muscle beneath the tailored wool. "You took my invisibility. You replaced it with a target, and then you gave me the armor to withstand it. I choose the armor." She didn't say she loved him, she didn't offer a tender sentiment. She offered what he valued most, a clear-eyed commitment to their shared, dangerous reality. A victorious darkness flared in Damian's eyes. He gripped her waist and brought her against him with a powerful finality. "Good," he murmured against her lips. "Then let the world see you." The kiss that followed was no longer an imposition of ownership but the sealing of a partnership, a complex, dangerous union of protector and protected, ghost and guardian. Elara Vance was permanently visible, no longer a maid in a gilded cage, but the openly acknowledged partner of Damian Rossi, choosing safety and power over lonely survival. Part 5. 6 weeks after the defining kiss in her office, Elara's life had settled into a rhythm dictated by money, power, and danger. The volatile equilibrium between her fear and her security had stabilized into a steel-plated confidence. She moved through the Manhattan elite, always positioned at Damian's side, no longer a ghost but a distinct, formidable presence. Her role as his personal assistant extended far beyond scheduling. She was his confidant in strategy, the quiet, analytical mind that reviewed the complex legal structures covering his illicit activities. She learned to read the unspoken hierarchy in the room, to recognize the subtle tremor of fear in the eyes of rivals, and the calculating respect shown by his allies. One Friday evening, Elara attended a high-stakes, ostensibly legitimate charity gala with Damian, a necessary display of wealth and dominance. She wore an emerald gown that made her eyes burn brightly, and though she wore long sleeves, the memory of the brand was an internal anchor. She stood beside Damian near the central bar, radiating a stillness that commanded attention. A minor associate, a nervous man named Valenti, approached to pay his respects. He spoke to Damian, but his eyes darted to Elara. "The new arrangement is quite efficient, Mr. Rossi," Valenti stammered, attempting a compliment. "Miss Vance has an excellent reputation for detail." Damian placed his hand squarely on the small of Elara's back, a gesture that was both protective and profoundly possessive. "Elara is more than efficient, Valenti. She is the measure of my stability. Any instability near her becomes instability in my entire operation. Understand that, and you understand everything about my priorities." The message was clear: Elara was a person of consequence, secured not by a title but by a threat. She watched Valenti retreat, his face pale, and felt the familiar, cold flicker of dark satisfaction. She was no longer a target, she was a weapon of deterrence. Her personal success was measured not in the silk dresses she now wore, but in the peace of mind she afforded her sister. Chloe, happy and oblivious in the mansion's lower kitchens, flourished under the head chef, unaware of the transactions of power that secured her world. Elara saw her sister only briefly, ensuring that Chloe was happy, well-fed, and still pursuing her dream of opening her own bakery someday. Chloe's safety was the constant, necessary justification for Elara's dangerous proximity to Damian. One night, Elara returned to Damian's private chambers, which she now shared, implicitly and explicitly, and found him on the terrace, overlooking the lights of the city. "You fit this life," Damian observed, turning to her. "I watched you tonight. You weren't performing. You were evaluating." Elara stepped up to the railing, the cold air sharp on her skin. "I have learned that chaos is only a problem when you can't predict it. You give me the ability to predict, and the means to eliminate the unpredictable." She looked at him, accepting the truth of their transaction. "I chose the armor because the cost of being safe on my own was greater than the cost of being safe with you. You bought my freedom from the past, and I paid for it with my future." Damian's gaze was intense, approving. He stepped forward,